Do you think your mother is playing a little prank on us? Regina asked her husband, shivering in the drizzling rain. The train arrived 20 minutes ago. Even my mother wouldn't stoop to such a cruel joke, Stepan replied, meeting his wife's gaze. He added doubtfully, well, not to that extent, Red. The previous night, the Tokarevs had received a message from Stepan's mother, arriving tomorrow morning. Train number so-and-so. Alla Igorevna was never one for unnecessary words. This information instantly filled Regina with despondency. Why is she coming? Her husband exclaimed anxiously. What happened? She didn't even provide the carriage number. Stepan tried calling his mother repeatedly, but to no avail. Regina looked at him sadly and chuckled, saying, "It's no use, Step. You know she can't stand shoving her throat down the whole wagon, as she puts it, especially since she knows you'd try to call her back right away. Explain yourself to your son in front of your compartment mates. It's not a laughing matter." The following morning, a prickly rain fell from the sky. Naturally, in their haste, no one had thought to bring an umbrella. The train had arrived a long time ago. For 10 minutes, the Tokarevs rushed from one carriage to another, scanning the motley and noisy crowd in search of a familiar face. Gradually, the human wave cleared from the platform. The last porter wheeled a cart laden with colorful suitcases past them. Soaked to the skin, the couple stood beneath the station clock, staring intensely into the unknown distance. Regina gazed longingly at the bouquet of wildflowers that had wilted into a pathetic bush. "Red, I think it's her," Stepan suddenly exclaimed, pointing to a lady with a large bag and a suitcase on wheels emerging from the back carriage. Indeed, it was Alla Igorevna herself. It was beneath her dignity to push through a shouting crowd. Stepan hurried towards his mother, kissed her, and took her luggage. With each step the approaching mother-in-law took, Regina desperately wished to disappear into thin air. She was an attractive woman, one would think, in her 50s, tall and elegantly dressed. But what an air of arrogance emanated from her stern face. Her gaze was penetrating and imperious, her lips tightly pressed together. Even the clatter of her heels on the platform echoed with a menacing tone, like on a parade ground. Headmistress, to say the least. "Hello, Alla Igorevna. You look beautiful," Regina greeted her warmly, attempting to discreetly pass her husband the bouquet. "Good morning, Regina." Alla Igorevna nodded indifferently and continued speaking to her son. "Anyway, I have almost 2 months of vacation, so I'll be here for a long time." "Well, that's good. It's been a while since you last visited us. Mom, these are for you." Stepan handed his mother the sad bouquet of flowers. "What a beauty," Alla Igorevna sincerely exclaimed. "It's nice that you remember my tastes. I've loved wildflowers since my youth." "It wasn't me, it was Regina who bought them. She remembers everything," Stepan proudly declared. "Well, that's what I thought," the mother-in-law casually remarked, cheap but angry. Alla Igorevna had her usual repertoire. As soon as she got into the car, she reached into her bag and pulled out a glossy magazine. Stepan, being careful, asked, "How was your trip, Mom?" "Did you sleep well? Watch the road," commanded Mamia, lowering her head into the magazine, paying little attention to Stepan's questions. Regina quietly turned away, gazing out of the window. Their relationship with the mother-in-law had never been smooth since the day they first met. 7 years ago, Stepan had brought Regina, his bride, to Volgograd to introduce her to his mother, Alla Igorevna. Upon seeing the shy and thin girl with a beautiful mane of dark red hair, Alla Igorevna closely observed her. "Regina, isn't that Latin for queen? It's a beautiful name. It carries weight," remarked Alla Igorevna. "My mother gave me that name," Regina readily replied. "Yes," agreed her prospective mother-in-law. "Unfortunately, parental love can be blind, and I named my son Stepan. Look what we got, Stepa the bummer." Alla Igorevna affectionately patted her son's injured head and, forgetting about the guest, sternly asked, "And what about Iroshka? She's waiting for you." "Mom again." Stepan brushed off the comment with ease. "You and Nina Ivanovna decided to marry us off without even asking for our opinion." Well, well, I'll see how guilty you'll look at Ira and Nina Ivanovna in an hour," remarked Alla Igorevna. "Did you invite them to dinner?" Stepan exclaimed indignantly. "Of course I did. And who do you think cooked all those delicious meals while I was at school from morning till night? Nina and Irishka. How could I not invite them?" Stepan, known for his stubborn character, responded with indifference, leaving Regina to bear the weight of guilt in her eyes. Irina, noticing that the guest was clearly uncomfortable, took a moment to whisper to Regina in the kitchen, "Don't be upset. Alla Severia doesn't give up easily. I have a fiancé. We submitted our application 2 weeks ago." "Why Alla Severia?" Regina smiled. "The kids at school gave her that nickname. When Artem was born, Alla Igorevna flew from Volgograd to the capital to visit her grandchildren on the first weekend. She lovingly gazed at him lying in his crib, and then, with a hint of regret, said, 'Our blood, you can't deny it.' Just like little Stepka, he was so adorable back then. And his eyes are blue, just like my daughter's." Regina's mother couldn't help but comment. "All babies have blue eyes," exclaimed her mother-in-law, indignant. "Thank God he's not a redhead." Alla Igorevna held deep affection for her grandson. For 2 consecutive summers, she took him to Volgograd for a couple of weeks, passing him buckets filled with fruit through a familiar conductor. However, despite these gestures, Alla's daughter-in-law was still not considered a true member of the family. The geographical distance between their cities was the only thing that saved her from further distress. Ardyanka, a 5-year-old, was perhaps the only person in the family who genuinely delighted in his grandmother's arrival. He eagerly admired the toys and proudly showed off his branded sneakers to his parents. On such occasions, Regina, here and there, unintentionally stepped on cherry stones and joyfully dropped them on the floor in the presence of her happy son. During this particular visit, Alla Severia remained consistent in her habits. After a couple of days, Regina started feeling like a completely worthless creature. It seemed she couldn't clean the apartment well enough, dress with enough flair, educate her son adequately, or cook anything beyond mediocrity. The mother-in-law skillfully made remarks, leaving no room for a response that wouldn't appear rude or foolish. Often, the second mother would demonstrate, by personal example, how everything could be done much better. While being alone on weekdays, Alla Igorevna didn't idle away her time. Regina was not a slob, but her apartment had never shone with such cleanliness before. The linens had never appeared so blindingly white, as if her mother-in-law had loaded them into some magical washing machine. "Alla Igorevna, thank you so much for your help. Our editorial office is in chaos right now, and I barely have any time for anything." Regina sincerely thanked her from the bottom of her heart, but was immediately met with a punch to the nose. "You're welcome. I can't stand by and watch my grandson suffocate in the dust of ages past." Possessing the patience of an angel, Regina refrained from responding to the taunts for a long time. However, one day she reached her breaking point. During dinner, Alla Igorevna took a large spoonful of Regina's signature cake, her pride and joy, tasted a tiny piece and remarked, "The sponge, of course, is not light, and the cream is a bit greasy, but overall, it's edible." That night, Regina silently fumed in the bedroom, giving her husband a quiet tantrum. Unable to bear it any longer, she returned to the kitchen, where her mother-in-law was engrossed in a game of solitaire. "Alla Igorevna, if you don't like the way I feed your son and grandson, perhaps you'd like to do the cooking." "Do you want me to do all the housework?" calmly asked her mother-in-law. "Well, why not? I'll handle the laundry and cleaning, and you can cook. Let's switch roles," she said. Without batting an eye, Alla Severia agreed, saying, "No problem." Lying in bed, Regina's husband sighed bitterly You shouldn't have started all this. Red. Now we'll go hungry with Temka. Mother was at school all day, and she never learned how to cook. Nina Ivanovna used to cook for us. She raised Irina on her own and didn't have much money, so Mom paid her to cook. Everyone was happy. You shouldn't have done it. Carrot Top, you really shouldn't. It's okay, you'll manage for a couple of days. Regina tried to hide the triumph in her voice. Finally, her mother-in-law had fallen into her own trap. It wasn't nice to gloat, of course, but sometimes Regina's street needed a celebration too. The next day, when Regina returned from work, the enticing aromas from the kitchen wafted through the hallway. Her family was already seated at the table, waiting for her. Her mother-in-law, wearing an amusing apron, was bustling about. "Regina, we're waiting for you. Wash your hands and join us at the table. I apologize if it's not fancy. I'm not a chef," Alla Igorevna said with a warm smile. There were tender, rosy chops, potatoes cooked in a special way, and a simple salad made with fresh vegetables, but dressed with exquisite and fragrant flavors. Everything looked so appetizing that Regina couldn't help but feel a twinge of envy. She subtly glanced at her husband, who shrugged his shoulders with a bewildered expression. "Mammy, the food is delicious. When did you learn to cook like this?" Stepan asked. "You know Stepan," his mother replied with a sad smile. "When you live alone, you inevitably find a hobby to avoid dying of boredom." While Regina's cheesecakes were always loved by her son, they could hardly be compared to the culinary artwork created by Alla Igorevna. Golden, fluffy circles studded with raisins and candied fruits, served with vanilla sauce. Even Regina couldn't help but drool at the sight of them. "Grandma, they're like little sons," Artemka exclaimed with excitement. "Grandma, will you make them for me now?" "Yay!" Regina's mother-in-law looked at her with a gentle chuckle, knowing the game was over. "All right, I'll cook now, but I have one condition: breakfast without me. I want to at least get some sleep during our vacation." The benefits of having her mother-in-law, Alla Igorevna, in their home were undeniable. Regina no longer had to rush to the stove while dragging a half-asleep Artemka to kindergarten. Her son used to struggle with reading, knowing all the letters but having difficulty putting them into words. However, Alla Igorevna effortlessly taught him to read in no time. Regina still didn't know the magic spell her grandmother whispered in his ear, but suddenly Artemka began tidying up his toys and neatly folding clothes on a small chair, wearing an important expression. Even the playful cat Buntik stopped scratching the wallpaper and wandering near the bathroom. Then it was Stepan's turn. One evening after dinner, her husband stretched blissfully and rose from the table. "Thank you, Mom, for a delicious dinner. And now you're off to your couch," Alla Igorevna innocently asked, sipping her tea. "Don't you want to spend some time with your son or help Regina with the dishes?" "Not today," Stepan sighed heavily. "I'm really tired. I've been working, Mom." "Really? Let me tell you a little secret. You're not the only working man in the world. Others manage to find time to take care of their children and help out around the house. I was at school from morning till night, but I dedicated every free minute to you, every single one." Alla Igorevna shook her index finger in front of her son's confused face. "And you? I've been living here for 2 weeks, and I haven't seen you wash a single plate for yourself, take out the trash, vacuum the carpet, or play with your child without reminders." "Mom, calm down," Stepan took offense. "Artemka doesn't like it when I interfere with household chores." "Really?" Her mother-in-law raised an eyebrow in amazement. Artemka has long turned into Cinderella, and you haven't noticed. If you're not helping, then at least don't act like a lazy bunny. Can't we keep the house clean and not throw dirty socks all over the place? Your grandpa, my daddy, never let his wife wash his socks even once in his life. He felt ashamed, can you imagine? Stepan fell silent, feeling ashamed. Then he laughed, attempting to break the tension. "All right, from tomorrow onwards, you won't see a single one of my socks. Oh, and I'll go take out the trash now. As the women were left alone in the kitchen, Alla Igorevna suddenly sighed. In my youth, I made so many mistakes. I was always afraid that Stepka would grow up to be a mama's boy. I wanted him to become a real man. Maybe I pushed too hard. He did become a man, but he lacks respect for women's work. You're a feminist, Regina smiled. No, I'm a realist. Stepan is a wonderful man with many strengths. I'm deeply in love with him, but I have to admit that he has his flaws, and both of you are far from being the ideal wife either. It was always like this. Regina was willing to have a normal relationship, even be friends, but each time Alla Igorevna erected an invisible and unbreakable wall between them. That morning, Regina made a startling discovery. She had accidentally left her car keys in the parking lot. Realizing her mistake, she immediately called the editorial office to inform them that she would be running a little late. Actually, you don't have to come in today at all, the editor-in-chief kindly responded. It's better for you to finish the article calmly and hand it in tomorrow. Regina felt a surge of relief and joy. Thank you so much, she exclaimed. I'll get right to work on it. Quietly entering her apartment, so as not to disturb her mother-in-law, Regina suddenly heard voices emanating from the living room. She froze in surprise, listening attentively. It turned out that Alla Igorevna, her mother-in-law, was having a conversation with a friend on Skype. Wanting to make her presence known, Regina hesitated when she heard the magical words, "I'll probably be going home in 2 days." Excitement filled her as she silently retreated to the hallway, eavesdropping on their conversation. Nina, I just don't have the energy or the means to stay here any longer, Alla Igorevna lamented. You can't imagine how much money I've spent on these lunches and dinners all week. I'll be left with nothing in my pocket. And you won't believe how expensive the simplest meals are in those restaurants. Well, why don't you tell your kids that you can't afford to feed the whole family on your own, advised her friend. Nina, how can I possibly tell them? On Monday, Stepan and Regina stocked the fridge to the brim. Why would I waste money when there's so much food at home? Alla Igorevna complained. Why did I even start this stupid argument? I could have been living happily without quarreling with anyone, but now I'm trapped. Do you think I should have told that Carrot Top that I can't cook at 50? He's so impatient, she continued. I was glad when I remembered there's a nearby restaurant with delicious home-cooked meals, but now I have no idea how to get out of this mess. The weekend is coming up, and I can't afford to order food from a restaurant for the kids. No, I'll go home out of embarrassment. Thank goodness, that little hopscotch dragonfly has never thought of checking the freezer. All the food is still untouched. Regina's cheeks burned with indignation upon hearing the name Hoppin' Dragonfly. Determined, she stepped into the living room, ready to confront her mother-in-law. And here you are teaching your grandson not to lie, Alla Igorevna. But what about yourself? You're a grown woman, Regina exclaimed. She delighted in the sight of her pale mother-in-law, who abruptly rose from her chair in a whirlwind of emotions. You were eavesdropping? Alla Igorevna exclaimed. Yes, Regina shouted triumphantly. I was eavesdropping, and now that silly little dragonfly Hoppy is finally going to check the freezer. With that, Regina hurried into the kitchen, and her mother-in-law followed closely behind. As they reached the fridge, Regina swung open the door, revealing its contents. Indeed, all the products remained intact. Why did you create this foolish game? Don't worry, we'll return the money to you. The young woman choked back tears, questioning, Did you want to humiliate me so much? Why? What did I ever do to you? Why did you hate me right from the start? I never spoke ill of you. I never turned Stepan or Artemka against you. Why? Because people like you destroy everything around you. You take away the dearest, most beloved things. Just like that. Not because you need them, but for no reason. Who is you? Regina asked in amazement. Who are you referring to? A red-headed tramp like you, her mother-in-law exclaimed. One woman stole my husband, Steph's father. Another stole my son. I nearly lost my voice when I saw you that day. An exact replica of that bastard. Even your red hair is exactly the same. I wondered if you were that tramp's daughter. Thank God you're not. Are you serious? Regina couldn't believe her ears. You've been seeking revenge for your suffering for 7 years? He was the only man I ever loved, her mother-in-law shouted. What does that have to do with me? Regina cried out, unleashing all her accumulated pain and resentment. What does it have to do with me? Alla Igorevna turned around and quickly retreated to her room. Regina hurried after her. For a few minutes, catching her breath, she observed as her mother-in-law packed clothes and makeup into a suitcase with renewed determination. Mother, where are you going? Are you leaving? Won't you even say goodbye to your son and grandson? Won't you tell them about the mischievous acts of the sweet fairy tale girl? Where are you going, Mother? Regina ranted like a machine gun. She felt ashamed listening to herself, but she couldn't stop. Your love story has grown stale. You have a grandson, and you still can't let go. 7 years of mocking me over such nonsense, and now you're running away. He was the only man I loved, Alla Igorevna repeated quietly, tears streaming down her face. Regina faltered immediately. Why are you crying? You built this wall yourself, Alla Igorevna. Her daughter-in-law suddenly felt pity gripping her heart. For the first time, she saw in her mother-in-law not an unyielding lady, but a vulnerable woman craving love and protection. Let's talk calmly. Where are you going? Artemka will be upset, as will Stepan. I've always liked you too. Deep down, I was genuinely willing to be friends, to love, but I couldn't even get close to you. Alla Igorevna silently clasped her suitcase and moved toward the exit. Regina blocked her path and took the suitcase from her. Alla Igorevna, I apologize. Let's have a proper conversation for once. Let me go, Regina, her mother-in-law pleaded, tugging at the suitcase. Give me that junk. Regina snatched the suitcase once again, throwing it to the floor and kicking it so hard that the heavy trunk, like a feather, flew aside and crashed into the night table. The beautiful statuette shattered. Mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, panting heavily, stared at the shards. Then Alla Igorevna spoke, Goal. And suddenly, both women burst into laughter. Uncontrollably from the depths of their hearts, they released the burden of mutual grievances that no one needed. They sat on the bed for a long time, laughing, crying, apologizing, embracing, seeking forgiveness. An hour later, Alla wiped her red eyes with a handkerchief. Today, Artenka asked me to make cheesecakes. But how can I do it now? I don't know how. It's all right. We have plenty of time until tonight. I'll teach you, Regina smiled. We just need to buy some candied fruit.